AEW has recently seen the ratings of Dynamite and Rampage both declining, specifically in the key 18 to 49 demographic. So that poses the question, why are AEW ratings declining? Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. And I wanted to do something a little bit different today. The news is quite slow. It's a slow news day, and I don't want to make stuff up. I don't want to clickbait you. So I want to talk about AEW ratings, what's going on. We've seen recently with Dynamite, the numbers are down a little bit. The key demo is certainly down. The AEW audience is getting older as opposed to being a young, modern fans' favorite promotion, or certainly their viewership of choice. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I want to do something a bit different, have a bit of an opinion piece. And it must be said, before I get into it here, because nowadays, if you talk negatively about WWE, or you talk negatively about AEW, or you talk about ratings going down, what they could improve on, the creative, etc., you're a hater. Not a Jamie hater, you're just a hater. You hate the product. You're a WWE stan, or you're an AEW mark. No, I always say this every single time I talk about WWE, AEW, whatever promotion that may be. I'm a WWE fan. I'm an AEW fan. I'm an Impact fan. I'm a New Japan Pro Wrestling fan. I'm an MLW fan. I'm a fan of pro wrestling. I'm a professional wrestling fan. I don't have a preferred promotion. I don't have a preferred program. I like stuff that I enjoy. Call me crazy. That's what it is. Now, when it comes to AEW, I still watch Dynamite every week. I try, if I can, to watch Rampage. There are only so many hours in the week, and sometimes it's just not really that must-see TV anymore. You can skip a week and miss Rampage and you don't really miss that much. And it must be said, when we're talking about AEW in this video, AEW, All Elite Wrestling, is still doing well as a company. AEW is still doing well as an organization. This year alone, they've had some of the highest gate receipts they've ever had in company history. They've had $1 million gates at the majority of their pay-per-views this year. All Out, Double or Nothing, Full Gear. They had it for the Grand Slam edition of Dynamite as well. So at the moment, AEW as a company, as a business, is still doing well. And when it comes to their future, they're not going away anytime soon. So people that are trying to celebrate the death or demise of All Elite Wrestling, frankly, it's farcical because they're not going anywhere. They will get an improved television deal next year with Warner Bros. Discovery. I'm very confident of that. Warner Bros. Discovery, despite the chaos that's been going on in that company with the merger of Warner Bros. And Discovery this year, despite them putting a load of films on hold because their stock price tanked because they cancelled a load of films, despite all of the moving parts that's going on in that organization, AEW, very much likely, unless they get a better deal elsewhere, which is a possibility, they will stay with Warner Bros. Discovery because Warner Bros. Discovery looks at All Elite Wrestling and says, look, in comparison to other projects, in comparison to other shows we could have on during that time slot, they're a cheaper alternative. They still draw ratings. There are still three things, I always say this, that draw ratings today in modern television. And remember, television's a dying art as well. Those three things are live sport, cable news, and professional wrestling. That still draws till to this day. Not as much as it used to, but it still draws, and it's still a sure thing. And AEW has outperformed expectations of Warner Bros. Discovery. That's why they renegotiated that deal very quickly after signing it, and actually they got paid by Warner Bros. At the time. That was in January of 2020, and it kept the company going throughout the pandemic. And the ratings, whilst they're still not as good as they were previously, or specifically the key demographic is declining a little bit, they're still doing well, and the chances are very, very high they will get a TV deal once again with Warner Bros. Discovery next year, and it will be an improved deal. They'll get paid more money, and they'll get paid to produce more content. So when it comes to AEW dying or going away, that's not going to happen. And I don't want AEW to die. That's the important thing as well. This past week for Dynamite, the ratings came out, and the key demographic number was the lowest number unopposed in the company's history when it was on that Wednesday night time slot. There have been times where the key demographic's been lower on Wednesday night. That's because they were going head-to-head with NXT. There's been other times when it's been lower because they were shifted to a different night and a different time slot. But unopposed Wednesday night live in the time slot of 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. this past week was the lowest key demo that they've ever had. The audience is getting older and less people are tuning in. But again, that doesn't mean that AEW is going to die, and I don't want AEW to die. Having a thriving second alternative promotion to WWE is vital to the professional wrestling industry as a whole. I've lived through the monopoly era of pro wrestling. I grew up in the monopoly era of pro wrestling. By the time I was just a young kid, WCW was on its dying days, and it was dying, and Again, having that alternative promotion to WWE, it's vital. And we can't go back to the monopoly era of pro wrestling. AEW, whether anti-AEW fans or people that aren't WWE fans like it or not, is the biggest professional wrestling company in North America since WCW. There could be an argument that even now it's bigger than New Japan Pro Wrestling. And I know New Japan's been around for a while, but in terms of an active competitor that's local to WWE in the same country, in the same continent, AEW is the biggest company since WCW folded back in 2001. Yes, people will now respond to that by saying, well, it's very disrespectful that you say that to TNA and Impact Wrestling. But AEW has already achieved things that TNA could never do during their entire history. I know, of course, they're still around to this day. Yes, TNA, back in the late 2000s, 2008, 2009, had, and early to 2010 when they went to Monday nights that first time, they had bigger ratings and they had more people watching than AEW has or has ever had. But you have to remember, TV was much different then. It's not fair or appropriate to compare AEW's ratings today to TNA's ratings back in 2008, 2009. Whilst Impact, TNA, whatever you want to call it, back in 2008 was getting over 2 million viewers, Monday Night Raw at that period of time was getting over 5 million viewers. Nowadays, in comparison, Monday Night Raw is getting 1.6 to 1.8 million viewers. Television has changed, and if AEW was around during that time period of TNA and it was on TBS or TNT, it would be getting probably more viewers than TNA. But in comparison to this time last year, the company, the product, AEW, is cold. There's no doubt about that. The company is cold, the product is cold, and whilst the ratings are largely the same, they're a little bit lower. The key demo, that's the key point here though. That is what is down significantly. Again, it's an older audience. AEW Rampage actually had the record as being the show with the youngest audience, having the majority of that of its audience be in that 18 to 49 demographic. That's now changing. It's actually getting closer and closer to Monday Night Raw, which is a significantly older audience. That must be said. Pro wrestling nowadays has a traditionally older audience, especially in that key demo, but the key demo is down significantly for both Dynamite and Rampage. In addition to that, critical response is certainly down too, with a much larger amount of apathy, I'm seeing anyways, towards the product and the booking, and those issues that were there in the first, let's say, 3 years of AEW that people were willing to overlook because it was a young, growing company. Now time's starting to pass and people are starting to say, well, why isn't that fixed? Or why is this still the same? Certainly attendance is down. That's factual too. Whilst the pay-per-views have done okay, you're looking at recent tapings of Dynamite and Rampage and they've been selling terribly. So it begs the question, why is that the case? What is going wrong? Why are the AEW ratings declining at the moment? And in my opinion, there's several reasons why. If you're going to look at Dynamite, I mean, let's just actually let's talk about Rampage first. Rampage, because it's easier to get that one out of the way. It's very simple. Rampage is a show that we've been conditioned as an audience not to care about. That's the facts of that. AEW Rampage is 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. on Friday. The time slot sucks. It always does. It was always going to struggle with that. But when it first debuted, the first few weeks, of course, with the first episode, it's always going to do well. But even the CM Punk, the first dance episode, did very well. Goes to show that if you load that show up, you can get people to tune in. But we've been conditioned at this point, with the show being on now for over a year, about 18 months or so, that if you miss Rampage, you don't miss anything. Nothing really happens on that show. The key show to watch is Dynamite. You don't miss any story. You don't miss any developments. Nothing happens on that show. And frankly, if you want to find out what happens on that show, you can find out pretty quickly. You can do it in about 5 minutes online, just after Dynamite goes off the air, or about an hour or so after it goes off the air, because you can read the taping spoilers. Now, again, that's part of the problem. So you've got it in a time slot that sucks, 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. after SmackDown, so fans might be burned out of wrestling by that point anyway. You've then got a tape show. People already know the results, so they could already make their mind up. I don't want to tune into that. Nothing's going to happen. Occasionally it's live, but even at this point when it is live, fans still aren't really tuning in because, again, at the same time, fans are realizing, if I miss this show, it doesn't really matter. So that's the issue with Rampage. And as I said before, the way I think to fix Rampage is to move it to a Saturday night in the time slot of Dynamite, that being 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Make it live every single week and see what happens there. But at this point, I think the damage might be done when it comes to Rampage, to be honest. Unless you give the audience, again, a reason to care about that show, you've kind of lost them at this point. Now, the key thing, I think, is Dynamite. Of course, Dynamite is AEW's flagship show. What's wrong with that show at the moment? Well, for me, as a viewer and as a fan, the show has become way too formulaic. And it was an issue that WWE had for years, and it's an issue they still have to an extent, but particularly under Vince McMahon. The show became too formulaic. You knew what's going to happen. You know what the format is going to be of Dynamite at this point. I never go into that show now wondering, oh, what's going to happen here? I know the structure of the show is going to be probably, most likely, not all the time. I mean, even it was a nice change of pace when the show didn't start off with a match actually a couple of weeks ago with Jon Moxley, William Regal, and Bryan Danielson. But most of the time, the show will start off with a match. Then we'll have that will go across a couple of commercials. Then have a pre-tape backstage. We'll go to another match, to a pre-tape, to maybe an interview segment in the ring with Tony Schiavone, to a match, to a match, to a match. Go to the main event. That will be it. And the show's too formulaic. The show's format is too tight at this point. The kind of great thing about Dynamite when it first debuted is you didn't know what it was going to be like, and it was a nice change of pace to watching WWE programming. But at this point, we know Tony Khan's formula, and you need to break the mold sometimes. You need to do something different. And the majority of the matches on that show are matches that have been put out there just with no real story. Why are they facing off against each other? Well, maybe because the prior week on an episode of Dynamite, there was a 30-second pre-tape backstage where someone was doing an interview and someone walked in and said, okay, let's do a match next week. Okay, that's it. And the match is set up. Or the match was just given away on social media. And I understand that you want to promote and hype the show, but I also want to go into the show wondering what matches I'm going to see. I don't want every single match to be given away on social media. Heading into Dynamite every single week, we know every single match that's going to take place on that show, and it's a case of maybe some people don't want to watch that match. So you've got to keep them hooked in by not announcing stuff. Keep the viewer guessing. As I mentioned, I don't go into episodes of Dynamite now wondering what's going to happen because I already know what's going to happen. And as I mentioned, a lot of these matches, they're put together with no story. Sometimes they're with people from outside of AEW, from New Japan, or from the indie scene that are put in there. And whilst the commentary and social media try to do a job of explaining the backstory there, sometimes they don't. And there isn't a story for a lot of the matches that goes from week to week that hooks me for the following week. There just isn't. The matches sometimes are random. And I can't, as a viewer, emotionally invest in some of those matches when there's no story there to be told. Speaking of those random matches, some of them, just to throw a bit of hype on there, and I guess to try and bring in ratings or try and bring in some meaning to that match, they're just randomly a title match. Now, in the past, you could get away with that because you could argue that, well, there's rankings involved. They're top of the rankings, or they're climbing up the rankings, therefore they deserve a title match. Okay, but now there's at least on every episode of Dynamite, there will be minimum 2 title matches. Minimum 2 title matches. And eventually, when you first do it, again, that's fine. You'll spike a rating because title matches are a novelty and title matches are big, and you tune in because you think, well, we don't often see title matches on TV, so I wonder if this is going to be a title change here. But when you see it every single week, and again, there is minimum, at least 1, but most of the time 2, a couple of title matches per show. Every single week, when you try and build it up, there are 2 title matches on this week's show. Well, there were 2 title matches last week. The week before that, there were 3. And when it comes to specials like Battle of the Belts, how is that a special? How is a special Battle of the Belts when every match is a title match when it feels like that's the case anyway with Dynamite every single week? No wonder it doesn't draw well, and no wonder it struggles in the time slot that it's in, because the draw, it being a match where all the titles are on the line, you see that most weeks on television anyway. And some of the people that get these title matches, they don't deserve one because there's no story of them pursuing the title. At least when you had the rankings, there was a bit of a story there whereby they had earned it. They were on an undefeated run, whereas now it's just a title match, and again, it doesn't mean anything because they're going to retain, and that's it. Chris Jericho is the Ring of Honor World Champion. He's defended the championship against a load of random people recently. Orange Cassidy the same, and I'm sure that I think there's a TNT title match announced already for this week's edition of Dynamite. Again, there's always a title match because there's too many titles, and that kind of goes into the next point. Ring of Honor. The forced Ring of Honor inclusion. Now, I do somewhat sympathise with Tony Khan here because he purchased Ring of Honor earlier this year, and clearly he's looking for a weekly Ring of Honor television show. And I do think that will come in 2023. I really do. I think with this expanded relationship that I think will be the case with Warner Bros. Discovery, I do think Tony Khan will get a Ring of Honor TV show. I don't know where that sits in terms of a day and in terms of a network. I don't know. He doesn't want to do it on YouTube. He wants to do it on television. That's fine. But whilst that's still up in the air, whilst Ring of Honor as a promotion and as television is still up in the air, they've got to almost do 2 shows in one every single week. They've got to do these Ring of Honor storylines, but also at the time still focus on these AEW storylines. And because now there's so many titles, because of the inclusion of the Ring of Honor titles, the world title, television title, women's title, 6-man tag team titles, tag team titles, that's 5 extra belts they have to have on that show. Every other match almost has to be a title match because they've got to defend the titles at some point. And you've got to include these Ring of Honor storylines that don't really fit in what the AEW storylines are going on at the moment. So it becomes a bit of a muddled mess, and people are struggling to follow what's really going on. And there have been some shows where it's been more Ring of Honor stuff than AEW stuff. And people, rightly so, will be watching at home going, well, I tuned in to watch AEW, not Ring of Honor. And again, it just becomes a bit of a mess. And there's no story there because they're almost trying to tell too many stories at once. And it's not working. They're not taking their time. So that's a problem too. And I think people are sort of showing their feelings towards, well, I don't want to tune in to watch Ring of Honor. I want to tune in to watch AEW. On top of that as well, the backstage drama that's been going on in AEW has put a massive black eye on the company. Can't ignore it. The allegations of, you know, the fights backstage. I mean, really trace it back. Look towards the beginning of this year. Cody Rhodes' departure hurt AEW. Factually, it did. He's gone to WWE and he has become a bigger star. He's become the star he wanted to be treated as in WWE. Now, in my opinion, he never really fit in AEW. I don't think he did. I think he always wanted to be this presentation of himself. I think he booked himself into a corner with the World Championship stipulation that he could have overcome. Whatever. I don't think we're ever going to know the full reason for Cody Rhodes really wanting to leave AEW. Whether it was money, whether it was presentation, whether it's whatever. I don't know. But he's gone to WWE. One of the founding members of the company is gone. That hurt. And then on top of that, you had all the backstage drama. You had MJF. Him possibly nearly walking out of the company. He wasn't happy with his money. Then, of course, you had CM Punk and the Elite, them facing off and fighting off and having a backstage brawl. Then you had Andrade and Sammy Guevara. You had Sammy Guevara and Eddie Kingston. You had all of these backstage arguments and allegations of issues or politicking or favorites. And again, the drama going on, it's led people to look at the company in a different way than when they had previously. And I said this before quite a few months ago at this point. AEW is no longer the plucky upstart company doing their best to go up against WWE or provide an alternative. They're not that company anymore. And frankly, they never really were because they were always backed by a billionaire family. So they always had the money and they always had a good television network and they always had good production quality too. So they were never that company. They were never really that organization. But certainly for the first few years, they were perceived as that. As we're just a small family coming together, trying to do something different, trying to provide an alternative, giving wrestlers creative freedom and allowing them to work outside jobs and bookings, and working with independent wrestling promotions, etc. That's not the case anymore. And I think people's perception of AEW has also changed. I think they look at it now as, again, not the company that's hip, that's sort of different to WWE. It's kind of feeling like it's a bit WWE light at times. And that backstage drama, as I mentioned, people are starting to choose sides. And when they choose sides, they tune out. And that's kind of what's happening right now with AEW too, because there might be CM Punk fans that watched AEW just because CM Punk, well, he's gone from the company at this point and they don't like the Elite, so they're going to tune out. They're going to tune out because they're on the television and Tony Khan picked their side. I don't know. But that's laid a black eye to the company too. So the perception of AEW's changed as well. The injuries haven't helped. AEW's had a ton of injuries this year. They really have. To Adam Cole, CM Punk, Hangman Page. The list goes on and on. Kyle O'Reilly, you name it. They've had a ton of injuries this year, and that's hurt as well. Kenny Omega's just come back, and then they had the Elite suspended for a while too. So everything that's been going on with that, you always want to have your biggest stars on television. But frankly, I don't lean into the injuries too much because over the summer, when they did have a lot of those injuries to Punk, to Omega coming back, and to Adam Cole, you still had people tuning in significantly, over 1 million viewers, and the demo rating was still high. But I think really the backstage dramas hurt them. And also as well, the competition improved. That's also a real key factor into all of this here. That during this period of time, the establishment in WWE, frankly, the reason this company was even created in the first place is because people didn't like the WWE under Vince McMahon. That changed. The competition, the establishment became a little bit cool again because Vince McMahon left. He retired in scandal, which is what everyone wanted. And suddenly you had Triple H in charge, and everyone likes Triple H. Everyone likes Triple H's booking and his creative. And suddenly people that didn't like WWE before started to give it a chance again and started to feel like WWE felt like the hot promotion and the cool promotion. So AEW then became even cooler. It was cooling down anyway, but then they look at the competition and they say, actually, the competition's doing all right again. And they're having record attendances and they're having record businesses and record revenue. And suddenly as well, a lot of the roster that left WWE or was fired from WWE by Vince McMahon or left because of Vince McMahon, suddenly they're guys in charge of that company. And WWE was always their dream and they want to go back. They feel like they have unfinished business. And Triple H wants them back as well. So you've also got this roster that was unsettled anyway, become even more unsettled because they see their guy, a guy they've got a great relationship, now in charge of the company. They think, I can go back there. I can make money there and I can live my dream and do what I always wanted to do in WWE. There's a possibility there. And Triple H, I'm sure, is sending feelers out as well. And that kind of permeates across the whole company. You've got an unhappy roster. You've got people that don't want to be there. You've got a show that's formulaic. You've got matches with no story. You've got too many title matches. You've got conflicting stories between Ring of Honor and AEW. You've got backstage drama. You've got injuries. And it's just merging into what is now a very cold company with declining ratings and declining viewership too. Now AEW can get back, and I think WWE, the sort of the bloom of the rose, is starting to come off a little bit with Triple H. There's starting to be some criticisms of his booking, but ultimately AEW has to change, and I think Tony Khan has to change. I think Tony Khan has to improve on his talent relations department. Even though they've overhauled that this year, they need to improve it even more. They need to get back to basics. They need to scrap the formula, and they need to simplify things again. Have matches with stories. Don't have too many title matches on the show. Yes, if you do that, the ratings might go down a bit more because they might be like, oh, to spike a rating, we've got to have a title match. We've got to have a major announcement. No. You've got to save it, and you've got to go back to basics, and that's my feeling on the matter. So guys, let me know your thoughts. Why are AEW's ratings declining? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe as well, bottom right-hand corner, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.